Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Jacobson. I'm a disability civil rights attorney, vocational rehabilitation counselor, and proud disabled woman working in the state of Michigan. I wanted to talk about the one of the more recent executive orders put out by the Trump administration, the one titled Ending Crime and Disorder on America's Streets, dated July 24th, 2025. This executive order is yet another attack on the disability community and on the disability justice movement. And it's really critical that parents of kids with disabilities and disabled adults, as well as disabled children and youth, understand what this order is requesting, what the effect it may or may not have, and your options under the law. So I want to go point by point with this executive order, provide a summary, and dive into some of the red flags that I'm seeing there. If you have any legal questions, always check with an attorney in your area. This video is educational in nature and is not intended to be personal legal advice. But if you are in the state of Michigan and you want legal assistance, feel free to reach out to me at Jacobson Law and Advocacy, 248-878-6940. We get calls, texts, and you can use RTT to reach us there, as well as over email, info@jlapllc.com. Okay, so getting into the executive order, ending crime and disorder on America's streets. It's not entirely surprising that the administration has put this out. We've heard these types of comments and rhetoric for quite some time about people with mental illness, people who are unhoused, people with other types of disabilities facing discrimination. And so the real concern that I have is less about the long-term ability of the courts to shut this down and more about the immediate effect it will have on many, many people with disabilities, many veterans, many people with mental illness. And so this starts off by stating, by the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, it is hereby ordered. Just that first sentence, I want to remind everyone that while the president does have the ability to put out executive orders, the courts have the authority to put those in check and to shoot them down or not enforce them. So just keep that in mind. Section 1 of the executive order, purpose and policy. You know what? Let me see if I can just share my screen here. Okay. So we have this executive order here. And if I scroll down here, section 1, purpose and policy, endemic vagrancy, disorderly behavior, sudden confrontation, violent attacks have made our cities unsafe. The number of individuals living on the streets in the United States on a single night during the last year of the previous administration, 274,224, was the highest ever recorded. The overwhelming majority of these individuals are addicted to drugs, have a mental health condition, or both. So just starting off here, I want to note that you'll see a lot of executive orders talking about their perception of things from the past administration. That's not altogether uncommon, but the frequency with which the past administration is being brought up in these other executive orders is a little bit out of the norm. But also, when we look at from the very first section, purpose and policy, we're seeing the demonization of people with mental illness, people who have substance use disorder, and people who are unhoused. And it goes on in that section to talk about, nearly 2/3 of homeless individuals report having regularly used hard drugs like methamphetamines, cocaine, or opioids in their lifetimes. An equally large share of homeless individuals reported suffering from mental health conditions. The federal government and the states have spent tens of billions of dollars on failed programs that address homelessness, but not its root causes, leaving other citizens vulnerable to public safety threats. Couple of things there. The overwhelming majority of people, not just unhoused people, but people in general, know someone or have dealt with the use of substances in the past, right? This is not a situation that's unique only to people who are unhoused. Additionally, people with mental illness can be housed or unhoused. And so to say that there's this unusually large group that is just wreaking havoc on the streets because they have mental health concerns, the evidence, as somebody who reviews the research and the evidence of what is actually happening, um, it's certainly needed that we provide mental health resources. The way that we do that most effectively, clinically, research has shown, is not in institutions. And the evidence-based practices have shown that people have worse outcomes in institutions. So keep that in mind, because the next sentence says, shifting homeless individuals into long-term institutional settings for humane treatment through the appropriate use of civil commitment will restore public order. What they're saying is, this order, they want it to empower people to be forced into psychiatric and other institutions because they have disabilities and or because they are unhoused. The United States Supreme Court previously set precedent stating that an individual with a disability has a right to live in the community and receive those community supports. And one of the reasons that the court came to that conclusion is because it looked at the vast history in this country of the institutionalization of disabled people. There were literally laws on the books called ugly laws, stating that people who looked, quote, ugly because they have disabilities could not be out in public. There were things like forced sterilization of disabled people, which the United States Supreme Court has yet to overturn, stating that if a person has a disability and they are committed to an institutional setting, or they have a voluntary or involuntary court order for mental health services or services for other disabilities, they could try to force sterilize you. They could take away your parental rights. They could take away your housing, and then they can criminalize you for being unhoused, is essentially what the effect they are hoping for with this executive order. They say it in the very first section. They want to criminalize mental illness. Section 2, restoring civil commitment. I'll share this again on my screen so that you can read along with me. Okay. Restoring civil commitment. The Attorney General, in consultation with the Secretary of Health and Human Services, shall take appropriate action to seek the reversal of federal or state precedent and the termination of consent decrees that impede encouraging civil commitment of individuals with mental illness. Let's take a quick pause there to address that. The courts consistently have discriminated against people with mental illness and people with disabilities. The disability community has fought really hard with our allies to ensure that they're not facing increased discrimination in the courts, including with these commitment, the civil commitment, that they're using this term civil commitment, but what that means is forced institutionalization. So let's say you're a parent of a child with a disability, that child has mental illness, and they go into adulthood and you're trying to secure appropriate services for them. Maybe it's through community mental health. And community mental health says, sorry, we don't have any other services that we can offer because our funding's been cut. So we can't provide individual therapy, which I'm hearing from them now to my clients. that they cannot provide individual therapy, that they can provide minimal case working services. But if you're that parent of an adult child, or you're that adult who is seeking assistance, wants to live in the community, wants to maintain employment, but there's no option because the funding has been cut, this executive order is asking that you be involuntarily committed to a psychiatric institution. It's literally in the wording. And it's encouraging through DHHS, through RFK Jr., who is stated in this executive order to be in support of this, that they want to commit people with mental illness to institutions. And the reason why I bring up RFK Jr. specifically, besides the fact that he's mentioned in here, is that that family has a complicated history with institutions for people with disabilities in this country. There have been really positive things that, like, Eunice has done, where they're trying to increase inclusion and accessibility for people with disabilities. But there's also this kind of sordid family history where Rose Kennedy faced a lobotomy and was institutionalized, and other Kennedy family members have been really vocal about saying horrific things about people with disabilities. And so we've got the Kennedys on both sides of the institutionalization spectrum, right? But RFK Jr. is in support of institutionalizing people with mental illness presently. He stated that, and it's stated here in this executive order under Section 2. So it also is saying that they want to provide assistance to state and local governments through technical guidance, grants, or other legally available means for the identification, adoption, and implementation of maximally flexible civil commitment. What I hear as an attorney when I read maximally flexible civil commitment is that they want broad authority to violate people's rights, to commit them to institutions for their disabilities. They also mention, which is kind of interesting in this executive order, that they want, quote, step-down treatment standards that allow for the appropriate commitment and treatment of individuals with mental illness who pose a danger to others or are living on the streets and cannot care for themselves. The wording of step-down treatment it stands out to me because that's what health insurance companies often use to deny people care, including people with mental illness. So they're going to say, well, have you tried treatment A, B, C, and D before we try E, And so it's delaying appropriate care, maximizing institutionalization, and separating families from their loved ones with mental illness. Section 3 is titled Fighting Vagrancy on America's Streets. I'll pull that up again so you can look through it with me. The Attorney General, Secretary of Health and Human Services, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and the Secretary of Transportation shall take immediate steps to assess their discretionary grant programs and determine whether priority for those grants may be given to grantees in states and municipalities that actively meet the below criteria to the maximum extent permitted by law. Enforce prohibitions on open illicit drug use. Enforce prohibitions on urban camping and loitering. Enforce prohibitions on urban squatting. Enforce and, where necessary, adopt standards that address individuals who are a danger to themselves or others and suffer from serious mental illness or substance use disorder, or who are living on the streets and cannot care for themselves, through outpatient treatment or by moving them into treatment centers or other appropriate facilities via civil commitment or other available means to the maximum extent permitted by law, or substantially implement and comply with, to the extent required, the registration and notification obligations of the Sex Offender Registry and Notification Act. Okay, so there's a lot there. diving into enforced prohibitions on open illicit drug use, enforced prohibitions on urban camping and loitering, urban squatting. These are terms that seem to be buzzwords in the administration. My concern as an attorney is that they're not legally clear. There's not a clear definition that is across the board understood in the courts for any of these terms. So there's a big gray area. I think the wording is incredibly vague in a way that courts should be able to shoot it down once properly contested. Um, but to bring up urban camping, urban squatting, and the sex offender registry, right? They're painting this picture of there are these inner city Black people. I mean, we know that's what they mean when they say urban, right? And they are creating this picture that these are dangerous individuals who are on the street, they're doing drugs in front of your children as you're walking to the store. They should be on the sex offender registry, and if they are, they're probably not complying with it because they're on the street. Like, there are just all of these things that are cobbled together to try to distract you from the fact that the language of this executive order is very, very broad, and they're trying to provide as much flexibility to the administration, to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, Transportation, Health and Human Services, the attorneys general. They're trying to throw a lot out there so that you hopefully don't realize that they're trying to take away everybody's rights in this executive order. Your right to live in the community, your right to seek mental health treatment and treatment for your other disabilities, and not to be institutionalized or criminalized on the basis of having a mental illness alone, right? Or being unhoused by itself. So far in reading this executive order, I'm not seeing where they're going to provide housing assistance. We'll see if it gets there. I have some theories on that. But the other concern in reading that last section, section 3, is that they're trying to change grant programs. They want to give all of those departments the ability to say, we're no longer going to fulfill this grant that had previously been agreed to in writing. That's a program that's currently being offered. They want to be able to look at those and say, well, if it provides things to people that we don't think are worthy, then we're going to divert those funds elsewhere. And that's another concern in this administration for sure, when it comes to disability justice. It also states in the section 3 that the Attorney General shall ensure that homeless individuals arrested for federal crimes are evaluated to determine whether they are sexually dangerous persons. It's interesting. The administration has a lot of focus on trying to find ways to tell unhoused people or mentally ill people that they're sexual deviants. Yet, to this point, we haven't seen disclosure through the Epstein files. I think that probably identified sexually dangerous persons, housed or unhoused. But I digress. But it also says that the Attorney General shall take necessary steps to ensure the availability of funds under emergency federal law enforcement assistance programs for encampment removal efforts. So this is not just stating we want to criminalize unhoused people or mentally ill people. It's we want to beef up our law enforcement so that we're able to criminalize them. And it says assess, this is what the President of the United States is telling the Attorney General, that this shall be done. Assess federal resources to determine whether they may be directed toward ensuring that detainees with serious mental illness are not released into the public because of a lack of forensic bed capacity at local, state, and federal jails or hospitals. So that pretty clearly states that they want the ability to lock people up with mental illness, regardless of whether there's available mental health treatment beds. So where do people end up if they aren't receiving mental health treatment? They want to criminalize mental illness. Okay. Section 4, redirecting federal resources toward effective methods of addressing homelessness. I'm not going to go into all of the details of this because it's a lot of the same stuff. But essentially, it's saying that they want the ability to get out of the grants that are in place, put new grants in place, and they want to prioritize available funding to support the expansion of drug courts and mental health courts, which sounds like a good idea. Until you realize that those courts require a lot of funding and a lot of administrative support at the local court level, which the federal government seems to be saying it's your responsibility to open up these courts. But there's no method for implementing that. And I personally believe that it was thrown in there as a, see, we're not bad people clause. But the rest of the executive order says otherwise. Section 5, increasing accountability and safety in America's homelessness programs. The Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development shall take appropriate actions to increase accountability and grants awarded for homelessness assistance and transitional living programs. These actions shall include, to the extent permitted by law, ending support for housing first policies that deprioritize accountability. They're saying, we don't want people with mental illness to be living in the community, and any policy that supports them living in the community and not facing law enforcement or jail is not prioritized. The Attorney General shall review whether such recipients are in violation of federal law. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, in coordination with the Attorney General, shall review whether such recipients are in violation of the terms of their programs to receive federal housing and homelessness assistance and freeze their assistance as appropriate. So not only are they saying we want to penalize people moving forward, they're saying we're going to look at everyone on Section 8. We're going to kick off as many people as we can. Essentially, reading between the lines, that's how I'm analyzing this as somebody who works in this area every day. Section 6. Oh, wait, before we get into Section 6, I want to show you a specific part of Section 5. I'm going to highlight this section here. In Section 5, they want to require those funding recipients to share data with law enforcement authorities in circumstances permitted by law and to use the collected health data to provide appropriate medical care to individuals with mental health diagnoses or to connect individuals to public health resources. You may read that and think, that's great. What's wrong with that? Let me tell you. Anytime we're collecting huge amounts of data on people with disabilities and using it to potentially kick them off of benefits, criminalize them, or put them in a position to be victimized or treated like criminals by the police, they want to take that data and use it against you. If you have mental illness, if you've dealt with substance use disorder in the past or present. And so it's a major concern to me that the Trump administration has included this section in this executive order, because again, it's beefing up law enforcement and then using data of people with disabilities against them with police in the courts and through it, the civil commitment process where you can be involuntarily institutionalized for having a mental illness. So then if we go down to section 6, nothing in this order shall be construed to impair or otherwise affect the authority granted by law to an executive department or agency, the functions of the director of the Office of Management and Budget, and the order shall be implemented consistent with applicable law. This order is not intended to and does not create any right or benefit, substantive or procedural, enforceable at law or in equity by any party against the United States, blah, blah, blah. So then the order ends. So I know we just went through that in quite a bit of detail, but my main concerns in reading this, outright stating they want to criminalize mental illness and people who are unhoused, not providing any guidance as to how people can secure appropriate housing, not addressing the actual steps needing to be taken for mental health care and healthcare in the United States, collecting data and lists of people with disabilities to use against them in court and with law enforcement, and removing funding from critical programs for people with disabilities and people who are unhoused. For me as an attorney, one of the scariest things that I've seen come out of this administration is this executive order. And people who know me know that I'm not like an alarmist. If I'm speaking about something, it's because genuinely there is concern there. I am a disabled woman living in the United States. I've lived with physical disability for, gosh, now more than I lived without it. And throughout my lifetime, I've seen disability advocates, activists fight so hard for disability justice. So to have an administration come in, empowered by the people who voted it in, empowered by all of the bad actors who are enabling this, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the Attorney General, it's incredibly infuriating. Is it disheartening? Yeah. Am I drained because I am trying to fight all of these things in the courts and represent my clients while advocating and trying to teach other attorneys about these things? Yeah, I'm exhausted. I think we all are for many different reasons, but we cannot not address an executive order like this. An order that explicitly states they're trying to take away your rights, criminalize you for things out of your control, separate families, hide disabled people away in institutions, jails, or prisons. People will lose their lives because of this. So you have to, if you're able, find ways to advocate, to raise awareness about this, to speak to your local leaders, people who are running for election, and make sure they know whether you're voting a politician in, or you're voting a judge in at the local level, or you're voting in a district attorney. You want to make sure you're asking all of those individuals how they would treat people with disabilities, including people with mental illness and those who are unhoused, and vote accordingly. There are over 60 million disabled voting adults in this country. That collective voice includes people from all other marginalized backgrounds as well. If we all come together and work together and organize, I firmly believe that we can set up the courts to stop something like this executive order from being implemented, but we also can prevent executive orders like these from even coming to fruition in the future. So if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to reach out to me. Shoot me a question in the comments, send me a DM. I don't always see DMs right away, so bear with me. But if you have any legal questions or disability consulting questions, of course, feel free to reach out to me, 248-878-6940, or Ashley, ASHLEY, @JLA pllc.com or Ashley at adaptiveinclusion.com. Thank you.